Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the podcast. I am going to do a recap of the Chicago Marathon weekend, and I also put out a Q&A poll on Instagram to get some questions from you guys to see what you want to know about, what you want me to talk about on this Q&A episode. And I'm just going to preface all of this by saying I am so bad at solo podcasts. I am very jealous and I envy anybody who can do solo podcasts because these are hard. It seems so simple. Just sit down and talk for 30, 45 minutes, however long. But when there's nobody to engage with and I'm just sitting here talking to myself, it's so challenging. So anybody that does solo podcasts, kudos to you because this stuff is hard. But basically, I'm just going to go through all of the questions you guys submitted. I basically went through them and tried to compile them as much as I could into generalized questions. A lot of you guys asked very specific things, but a lot of you guys also asked questions that were all kind of similar generally. So I've got 20-ish questions here that I'll kind of just go through, and I'll try to sort of do it chronologically as the race progressed, even starting back all the way to my training, through the race week, through traveling to Chicago, race morning, going through the race, post-race, basically everything involved with the Chicago Marathon. I'll try and provide as much information, as much knowledge and value to you guys so that hopefully you can learn something from my experience, take something away from this. I think that you will. I've definitely learned a lot. Each marathon that I do, I learn something new every single time, and this one was no different. So hopefully, again, you can take something away from my experience and use it to apply to your next marathon, your next race, whatever it might be, so you can PR, hit the goals you want to, and become a better, faster, and stronger runner as a whole. So with that being said, just a quick kind of overview of how the marathon went for me. My goal was sub 2:45, 2 hours and 45 minutes, and I ended up running a 2:44:11, 2 hours, 44 minutes, 11 seconds, which came out to a 6:16 average pace per mile. I believe that's about 3 minutes and 54 seconds per kilometer. The United States and our imperial number system. Gotta love it. But overall, I was very, very pleased with the results from the weekend. I was truly very, very nervous going into this race because training through the summer here in Texas is just so brutal. This is my first time doing it, and I do not do good in the heat. I don't think anybody really does good in the heat. Most of my runs on just a typical morning were 85 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's around 30 degrees Celsius. So very hot, so humid here in Texas. It's typically 80 to 90% humidity, if not higher. So the feels like temperature was always a little bit warmer. You're sweating 5 minutes into the run. Just brutal training, and it sucked for sure. But I know now that it was definitely worth it. It definitely made a big difference going into Chicago where it was 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it was 5 degrees Celsius, something like that. Perfect conditions. Chicago is a little humid, but not nearly as humid as Texas. And actually, at a certain point, the temperature becomes cold enough that the humidity makes it feel colder rather than warmer. So that was kind of the case, which was nice. But overall, picture perfect race weekend. Weather was money. Pacing strategy was perfect. I'll get into all that stuff. But as a whole, very, very happy and pleased with how the weekend turned out. So with that being said, I'm just going to kind of dive into all these questions. Again, give you guys as much knowledge as I can, as much information, and we'll go from there. I'm going to try and not edit this at all. I'm just going to let it rip, and we'll see what happens. All right, here we go. So question number 1 was race week sleep tips. Sleep is tough before a race. A lot of it is just nerves, I think, and also if you're training properly and you have like a proper taper going into your race, Obviously, you're going to have lower training volume from a strength training side and a running side, or running perspective. And so you have all this like excess energy. You know, you go from, for me, it was like running 70 miles a week to now I'm tapering and I only have like 40 or 50 miles and I have, you know, hours of extra free time. I'm feeling pretty good. And so it's hard to sleep at night because you have all this excess energy. Plus, you're also nervous for the race. And so sleep tips for me is like just try to stick to a consistent schedule as much as you can. Try to do what you normally do during race week or you know, during a normal training week. Do that the same for race week as much as possible. And I think that goes also for like nutrition stuff too. I feel like everybody, you know, they get to race week and like, oh shit, it's already here. And they start like eating all these foods that they didn't normally eat. And they start, you know, doing all these stretches and like trying to run more hills or just doing things that they didn't do during training that they probably should have done. Because they're kind of panicking at the last minute because it's race week. And so my best piece of advice is just skip all that stuff. Just do what you're used to doing. Trying to stay as consistent as possible. Didn't even answer the question about sleep. Other than consistency, it's just I like to read before bed. I try to be asleep by like 10 to 11 p.m. Most nights, and I'll like turn off my screens, get off the computer, get off the TV, get off my phone at least an hour before I'm trying to fall asleep, and then I'll, you know, brush my teeth, go through my routine. Read a book for like 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'll pass out after that. It's really like once I turn the lights off and I'm trying to go to sleep, it does not take me very long, fortunately, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes at the most. So I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, again, the biggest piece of advice there is just be consistent, do what you normally do. Don't freak out because it's race week and try to do a bunch of things differently. Question number 2, my mindset during race week / leading into the race. So I guess kind of the same thing is like being consistent and doing the normal routine. And I guess one thing I should preface that with is my peak week of training is typically 2 weeks before race week. And I try to treat that peak week of training as much like race week as I can, meaning like eating the same foods, waking up and going to sleep at the same time. I guess mostly those two things, sleep and food, and just like the normal routine in terms of like strength training, all that stuff. I try and simulate race week as much as I can 2 weeks prior to the race. And I think that helps a lot when it comes time for the actual race, because I can just trust that, okay, I already know my plan for the week. I already did this a couple weeks ago. I've got all my ducks in a row. I don't have to like panic and worry about what I'm going to do because I've already practiced it and gone through the motions of it. And so I guess mindset during race week is just trusting the process and knowing like I've put in the work. I can trust my training. All I got to do is show up and execute. I'll also during race week kind of just double over like my nutrition strategy, my pacing strategy. I'll like write it all down. And I think one other good point on race week mindset is knowing that all of the physical work has been put in. You're not going to gain an ounce more of fitness during race week. Like you can go out and run as hard as you freaking want 3 days before the race. It doesn't matter. You're not going to gain any fitness from that. And so as long as you train properly, you can trust in that, okay, I put in all my work. I'm physically ready. Now it's just getting mentally ready. The race week is all about mental preparation. I guess here's another thing that I could do a whole podcast just on mental preparation, apparently. But one thing that I always tell myself and plan out ahead before any race, whether it's a 5K or a half marathon, an ultra, whatever it is I know that inevitably at some point during the race, I'm going to reach a point where I say, this sucks. This hurts. I should just stop and walk. I don't need to do this race. Why am I out here doing this? Whatever it is. You start asking yourself all these questions and start trying to negotiate with yourself later on in the race. And that happens to everybody. And I think as long as you anticipate that happening and you expect it to happen, and then in addition to that, you have an answer prepared for yourself when you get to that point, you'll have no issues on race day when you inevitably get to that point. And so for me, and everybody else, they have their own mantra that they tell themselves, their own why. And I guess for me, it's just, I told myself I'm going to run a 245. I put in the work. I spent months and months training. I sacrificed time with friends or family or work or other different things to hit this goal, and I put in all the work. So when it gets to that point at mile 20, 22, where I want to stop and walk, it's like, okay, you put in all this time and effort, just keep going. You've got like 20 to 30 more minutes of running. Just suck it up, push through, and you'll be just fine. But if I don't plan that out ahead of time and I just show up to the race like, oh, I'll just run 245 and whatever happens, happens. And then I get to that point where it hurts and it sucks and I'm not prepared, then that's usually a lot of times when you bonk or you quit on yourself and you end up walking or missing your goal time. So that's a very important point that I wanted to make. Pre-race nutrition. Everybody asks about nutrition stuff for this, especially like the carb loading process. So I use this calculator for carb loading. It's from Featherstone Nutrition. The girl that created it, his name is Megan, and this calculator is clutch. My coach, Will Nation, actually showed this to me when I was prepping for Boston earlier this year. But you basically plug in your height, your weight, your age, and then you plug in your goal time for your race. And then it'll spit out this number of how many carbs you should hit. It actually gives you the option to do a 2-day or 3-day carb load. I always opt for the 3-day carb load just because basically the way our glycogen system works, which glycogen is the fuel that we primarily use for running marathons, the way that glycogen system works is it's like a battery rather than like a car with a gas tank in it. You can't just like show up the night before the race, eat a bunch of pasta and expect to be good. You can't just show up to the gas station, put the nozzle in, fill it up real quick, and you're good to go. It's more like a battery where you have to plug it in. It's got to take some time to charge. It goes up a few percent, as you go. It takes time. But because of that, it can last a little bit longer. And so same thing for our glycogen system is it takes days to fully top off our glycogen stores. So that's where the 3-day carb load comes in. For me, it was about 600 grams of carbs per day. So the race was on Sunday. I started Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 600 grams of carbs per day. Fortunately, the first day of that, I was here at home in Austin, and I was able to just track the carbs with an app. I use this free app. It's called Macros First. It's super handy. And I stuck to mostly fruit juice, dried fruit, berries, bananas, all that kind of stuff, just because it's lighter, it's easier to eat. I already eat a lot of it, so my stomach's used to it. And then I'll mix in some other things like sweet potatoes, or I try to avoid it, but things like pasta or rice, just because it's a little bit heavier, more dense, it weighs you down, it's harder for your stomach to digest. At some point, like during the carb load, I think you got to just get carbs in wherever you can get them, because 600 grams of carbs is a lot for me. That ends up being like 3,800 calories. And kind of the same thing as the sleep thing I was talking about is like when you're tapering, you have less training volumes. You're not burning as many calories, but you have to shove in so many calories to get those carbs up. And so it's challenging. And so I definitely try to foundationally start with like good, healthy carbs. But at some point, it's like, okay, I'll just eat this pastry, or I'll eat this bowl of pasta, whatever it is. So, carb loaded for 3 days. The day before the race, I'm trying to remember what I had there. For breakfast, I had some pastries. What did we have? The day before the race was the shakeout run. So yes, we had the shakeout run. And then after that, Bree and I stopped by this pastry shop. I had like 3 or 4 croissants basically. And then after that, we stopped by Whole Foods. I had a whole bunch of fruit. I had a couple of sweet potatoes. They had some mac and cheese. I normally don't eat mac and cheese, but it was carbs, so I ate some of that. And then had some mashed potatoes. For dinner, we actually had plans to eat out at this Italian restaurant, but after the shakeout run and going to the expo and just like being on our feet all day, we would have to have taken another Uber to this Italian restaurant, and we were just tired, didn't want to get out of the hotel, and I'm like, I got to run a marathon tomorrow. Let's just chill. So we ordered in Noodles and Company, and I got just buttered noodles with crusted Parmesan chicken on top of the buttered noodles. And then I had a side of chicken noodle soup, as well as a massive Rice Krispie treat. So again, these were definitely processed carbs. It wasn't my first choice. But because I carb loaded 3 days prior to the race, I knew that last meal wasn't like super, super essential. It is important for sure, but it's not like make or break, basically. I just knew I needed some calories, needed some carbs, and that was like the best option that we had at our disposal. And it's hard when you're traveling to try and get in good stuff. So that was the carb load for the race. And then before I go into like my race nutrition and like the morning of, I'll tell you like my general pacing strategy that I had going into the race. So every marathon that I've ran, every marathon where I've coached somebody where they've had a really, really good race, where they hit a PR typically or hit their goal time, is generally done with negative splits. Even the world record that was set in Chicago, the guy Kelvin Kiptum ran negative splits, meaning, if you don't know what negative splits are, the front half of your race is a little bit slower, and then the back half of your race is a little bit faster, or at least like the last few miles of your race, you speed up and run a little bit quicker. So that was the plan going in. So the general pacing plan was I needed to average about 6:17 per mile. So from the start to mile 4 was going to be anywhere from 6:15 to 6:20, just a little bit slower, even all the way up to like 6:25 if I needed to, depending on the crowds. I kind of gave myself some wiggle room there. And so again, start to mile 4 was 6:15 to, let's just call it 6:25, with the goal pace for the marathon being 6:17. And then from mile 4 to mile 22 was just locking in right around goal marathon pace, somewhere between like 6:10 to 6:20, ideally hitting somewhere around like 6:15, 6:16. And then from mile 22 to the finish, the goal was to negative split from anywhere, basically anything faster than goal marathon pace. So like 6:17 and below. And we basically nailed it right on the head. My front half, I believe I ran a 1:22 half, and then on the back half I ended up running like a 1:21. So I just know I don't remember the exact seconds, but the back half was about 40 seconds faster than the front half, which was amazing. And again, I can't preach negative splits enough. Every really good race I've had where I feel good at the end, I hit the goal time, hit the PR, is when I'm running negative splits. So I would definitely encourage you to embrace that philosophy and do it if you can. Next, I will go into the morning of the race nutrition as well as my nutrition during the race. So morning of the race started at 7:30. They recommended everybody get to the starting area around 5:30 or 6 a.m. So I woke up at 5 a.m. and I had a scratch Rice Krispie treat. I was eating these during all of my prep. I love these things. They're so easy to get down. They taste good. They're light. I used to use the Morton solids, and I just can't choke those down anymore. They're a little bit too dense for me. I like the flavor, but the Morton solids are just a little too dense, and they're hard to get down early in the morning. So I switched to the scratch Rice Krispie treats, which I like a lot. So I had one of those, as well as a 24-ounce bottle of water. This bottle, to be specific, right here. And then with that, I had 3,000 milligrams of sodium through switchback electrolytes. So that was 3 servings of electrolytes. And I drank that from basically ate and drank that from 5 to 5:30 a.m. Then I took an Uber from the hotel over to the marathon start line. Got to the start line around 6 a.m. Went through the bag check and security, all that. Fortunately, I got there a little bit earlier. It was like right at 6 a.m. Basically when they recommended people to show up, but there was no lines at all. Like I walked right through security, took like 2 seconds. None of the porta potties had lines yet. So if you're running Chicago, I definitely encourage you to get there somewhere between 5:30 to 6 a.m. and you'll have a much less stressful time, I would imagine. You can get up to the start of your corral. You can get through security and all that stuff without having to wait in line. And yeah, so make note of that if you're planning to run Chicago. But after I got there around 6 a.m., I took with me more electrolytes, a Morton drink mix, and then all my gels. So I had, and a packet of 2 before. So once I got in, I mixed all that. It was a Morton Drink Mix 320, a packet of 2 before, and then another 2,000 milligrams of sodium through electrolytes. So 2 servings of electrolytes. Mix that all together in a bottle, chug that over the course of like an hour, basically from 6 to 7, just kind of sipped on it. Right before the race started, once I got into the corral, I threw a gel down. So the race started at 7:30. It was probably 7:25, about 5 minutes before. I took a gel, a Morton 160, just to make sure we had a gel in our system already going into the race. The race started at 7:30. And then throughout the race, just kind of go through the race nutrition. It didn't go as good as I was hoping. I kind of struggled to get gels down, unfortunately. My plan was to do a gel every 4 miles, so 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20. So I had 5 gels with me total. I think altogether I was only able to get down 3 of them. The one at 4 went down just fine. The one at 8 went down fine. And then that's where it kind of got weird. Mile 12, I kind of struggled to get that one down. I think I got about half of it down, and I ended up just tossing the other half because I'm like, nope, it's not happening. And it's not even like I couldn't, like it wasn't like my stomach couldn't handle it. It was just like I was running so fast that like I was breathing so hard, my heart rate was so high that like even trying to just swallow it was really hard. And my mouth and my throat was just like heaving it up essentially before I even was able to swallow it. And so I spit it out. I still got like half of it down. And then basically the same thing happened at mile 16. I got another like half a gel down. And then I only had 1 gel left on me from 16 to 26. And I was going to take it around mile 20 or 22. And I looked at it, I pulled it out, and I was like, this thing ain't going down. So I literally just chucked it across the course into like where the aid station was at. And yeah, so I basically did the whole marathon in 3 gels, which I would not recommend that because I could tell by the end of it, like the last 3 to 4 miles, I definitely was lacking on some fuel. I was like really just feeling gassed, and I know that if I had an extra gel on me, it would have made a big difference. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. You got to adapt on race day, be ready for anything. One thing that I do think helped me a lot was I had a handheld bottle. I had it's the Nathan Exo Draw. And the nice thing about this bottle, as opposed to a lot of other handheld bottles, is it's like a soft flask with this like handheld thing around it. And so it has pockets on the outside. I shoved all my gels in there, so I don't have to worry about where I'm going to fit them in my shorts. And then because it's a soft flask, as you drink it, there's no air in there versus like the hard-sided ones. As you drink it, it's like sloshing around because there's all the air in the bottle. So this one, it just shrinks basically as you consume the liquid, which is nice. And in that bottle, I had another Morton Drink Mix 320, which is essentially like 2 gels worth of carbs. And then I also had another 2,000 milligrams of sodium from Switchback. So I think that handheld bottle with the liquid calories definitely helped me. And I think for future races, what I'm going to do is try to stick to liquid calories as much as I can, as opposed to the gels. The gels are easier, more convenient for sure, than having to like somehow get a bottle on the back half of the course. But I'll figure that out at a later date because the liquid calories are just so much easier. And I think that's what a lot of the elite people are doing now too, is at least during races, from what I've seen, is just sticking to the liquid calories with a bottle as opposed to carrying gels. But again, it's easier for them to just because they have a table for the elite runners, which is nice. For us, regular folks, we have to figure out a way to somehow grab another bottle on the back half of the course, but we'll figure that out at a later date. So that is the nutrition strategy. That's how it went down. Pacing strategy, how it went down. The next question, I got a lot of questions about the GPS issues with Chicago, which I was definitely concerned about this going into the race because everybody was telling me about, oh, your GPS isn't going to work. Forget about your watch for the first few miles. Just manually lap every mile for the race. I anticipated that going in. I planned on doing that, but fortunately, like I didn't really have any GPS issues. Even the first mile, there's like a half-mile stretch where you're just under this really long underpass and you're like closed in with these buildings. You can't even see the sky. And my GPS, when I got to mile 1, as soon as I hit mile 1 on the course, my GPS, my watch said mile 1. And so it was literally spot on, which was surprising. It did get kind of funky from like 2 to 3, and then from I think it was like 12 to 14 when we got back into the city, just because all the buildings kind of mess with the GPS. But surprisingly, I think my watch ended up logging like 26.4 miles as opposed to the 26.2. So it was off by like 0.2 altogether. But really, I didn't have to worry about the GPS too much. I just kind of took mental notes of like where my watch would beep when it was at hit the mile mark, as opposed to where I was at on the course. So I kind of knew I was going to be off by like maybe 20 to 30 seconds from what like my time was saying, if that makes sense. So I knew that like my average pace that my watch was telling me was probably a bit faster, because on my watch, I think it ended up saying 6:13 per mile, whereas the actual like chip time was 6:16. So I knew that going into it. So that's just like a good thing for people running Chicago or any race at all, is like making sure you know or like paying attention to where your watch is at in relation to like the actual time on the course. All right, the next question is weaving in and out of crowds. I had a few people ask me about this. Fortunately, in Chicago, I didn't have to worry too much about the crowds. Maybe the first mile or two, it was kind of crowded, but I feel like the way the corrals are set up, and they actually make you verify your time, at least for Corral A, and I think maybe Corral B too. They make you verify your like anticipated finish time by showing what you've ran previously. And so I was able to get up in the fastest corral, which was nice. I didn't have to worry about dodging too many people, because in Boston this year earlier, that's probably what prevented me from, it's easy to blame it on this, but probably what prevented me from hitting the sub 250 I was going for there was the first 3 miles of the race. We were just stuck by all these people who were running their goal time like 5 to 10 to 15 minutes slower than what we were trying to go for. So right off the bat, the first 3 miles in Boston, we lost like 2 or 3 minutes off of our overall time because we just couldn't get around people. The roads are super narrow. You're packed in really tightly. And I think we were just too far back in the corral. So fortunately in Chicago, I was definitely worried about it, but fortunately there was no issues with that. I had to bob and weave a couple people, but one piece of advice, if you are in a corral at the beginning of a race and you're trying to weave in and out of people, I would recommend just sticking to the outside as much as you can. Don't go in the middle. That's what I did in Boston, and I got stuck there forever. So go to the outside of the corral and like the edge of the course, and just run there, because it's going to be congested the most in the middle. If you just stick to the outside, it's easy to hop around people. You can go in and out a little bit easier. So that's what I would recommend there. I had a question about preventing chafing. I chafed hard. You won't be able to see it because I've got a t-shirt on, but like I always chafe so bad here under my like tricep area and then my lats. It like rubs so hard that it chafes. Like it's all scabbed up right now. You can't see it, but I put chafe cream on, but apparently not enough. And then I also tend to chafe in between my thighs and like down in that region. Fortunately, I didn't have any issues with that area for Chicago, but I do use this stuff. It's called Salty Britches. It has worked amazing up until this point, or so far. Obviously, I just don't think I put enough on, or it could have rubbed off like from taking sweatshirts on and off before the race. But yeah, Salty Britches has been amazing. I also put this stuff on my feet to prevent blisters. It's called Sport Shield. It's like this green stick, and you just roll on this liquid chafe gel all over your toes. I don't get any blisters anymore. I just get terrible blisters. I don't know if it's because of that Sport Shield or just like my feet have become acclimated to running. But yeah, I would say prevent blisters and chafing as much as you can, because that's like one of the worst ways to ruin a race. Like if you're fit, if your nutrition's good, all that, and then you have to, suffer through chafing, that just sucks. So Salty Britches and Sport Shield has been amazing for me. A few people asked about bathroom breaks. I don't ever stop to go to the bathroom during a race. Not because I don't have to, pee, but it's just, in my opinion, I cannot let a bathroom break make or break my goal time. Like, in my opinion, I can hold it, for 2, 3, 4 hours if I need to. And I would rather hold it. Honestly, I'd rather just pee my pants at that point. If it's like, if I have to go so bad that it's either going to come out or I have to just stop, I would just let it come out, to be honest. But I think one way to like easily prevent having to go to the bathroom is to just be intentional with when you're drinking, and like test all this during training. Like determine, okay, if I stop drinking 30 minutes before my run and I get in a quick pee before the run, am I still gonna have to pee during the run? If you're still RPing, then you're gonna have to bump it up to like 45 minutes or an hour. The next question, I actually got a lot of people submit this question about my heart rate being so high. Why was it so high? How was I able to maintain it at that level for so long? And am I ever worried about it being so high? First off, I'm definitely never worried about it being that high. In my opinion, or at least in my experience, my body will stop. Like my brain or whatever will force me to stop running before something bad happens. Like I don't know whether it be like a heart attack or something, but like I am more than comfortable of pushing my heart rate and my body as high as possible, because I'm just comfortable enough knowing that or assuming that I will stop and walk or something, like everything else will hurt so bad before my heart gives out that I'm never truly worried about that. And I don't think anybody really should be, unless you obviously have like family history, or other experiences with cardiac issues. But if you're a normal, healthy person, I don't think you need to be worried at all about your heart rate being high, quote unquote high. My average heart rate for this marathon, according to my watch, obviously take this with a grain of salt because it was just reading off of my wrist, but it said 178. I mean, I was definitely pushing it. The later miles, I was probably like low 180s. So definitely quote unquote high, I suppose. I have no clue what my actual max heart rate is. I would guess it's probably somewhere in like the mid to high 90s if I had to guess, but who knows? In terms of marathons, that's how my heart rate is for every marathon I've done. It slowly starts around like 150, 160, a little bit above aerobic threshold, and then it shoots up into like 170s, 180s for the rest of the marathon. So in terms of like how to maintain that, I guess just like if you train properly and you're really pushing yourself and you're hitting those paces, matching that same effort through training, you just build up a tolerance. It's, again, with marathon training, like our bodies are capable of so much more than we ever think. And so a lot of marathon training is just developing that mental callus and that mental adaptation to like that uncomfortable feeling that we get when we run and it hurts and our bodies and everything is telling us to stop. But how to push through that, I think it just comes with time and experience and knowing in the back of your head that like when it gets to that point, you can still keep going if you really need to. So I'm never worried about my heart rate being too high when it comes to a race or a workout. And I don't think you should be either. And as far as maintaining it, just keep spending more time doing it. And over time you build up this mental toughness and this mental callus to like get comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling. Another question I got from several people is how to deal with cramping. Fortunately, I have never dealt with cramping. I've only cramped up one time ever, and it was during my first 50-mile race because I was just like wildly under-fueled with electrolytes and hydration. Since then, I learned my lesson, and I am usually overhydrated, not over, but properly hydrated, which feels like you're overhydrated, basically. And so I've never dealt with cramping. One interesting thing on cramping, too, is there's a study out there that talks about how or that proved that muscular endurance from whether it's running or strength training actually has more of an effect on preventing cramping than even sodium. I don't remember exactly how the study went, but essentially they were able to prove that even if you're sufficient with your sodium levels and electrolytes, that if you're not properly trained from like a muscular endurance standpoint, that can still outweigh the sodium effect. So basically meaning, yes, you need to load up with sodium, but more than anything, you need to train your muscles to be able to handle running 26 miles. And so I think that's, again, another reason that people need to strength train, runners especially, is you're not only building up strength and that connective tissue within all your joints, but you're building that muscular endurance to prevent cramping, prevent bonking, and just make your muscles more efficient as a whole. I'd say to deal with cramping, first off, make sure that you are loaded up on sodium. And second, make sure that you strength train and just work on that muscular endurance, which just takes time. It's an answer that nobody wants. And then I guess this is kind of a similar question, but just avoiding bonking, avoiding bonking and avoiding hitting the infamous wall that most people, or a lot of people, tend to hit from 20 to 26 typically. Very, very similar answer to the last question is, I think it comes down to fueling and what your training looks like. If you're properly fueled with gels, carbs, water, electrolytes, that's an easy way to prevent bonking and hitting the wall. And I think more than that is just proper training, making sure you're getting in sufficient amount of long runs, lots of long runs over, between 2 to 3 hours during your training, matching marathon pace deeper into those workouts by like either incorporating intervals into your long runs occasionally, or doing like a fast finish long run where you do, for example, like 14 miles easy, and then you do the last like 6 miles from 14 to 20, like fast at marathon pace or something, and just getting your legs used to running that pace deeper into the workouts. So again, to avoid bonking, hitting the wall, proper hydration, proper nutrition, early and often on those things during the race, and then proper training going into the race. Again, a lot of times, like if you didn't train properly and you're just like going in on a prayer basically to not hit the wall, you can do all the nutrition and hydration. It might work for you, but more than likely your muscles just don't have the endurance and you're probably going to cramp regardless. Another question, mindset when it got hard. I love this question. And I kind of briefly touched on it earlier, but I think knowing ahead of time that you're going to inevitably hit a point in the race when it gets hard and you want to quit. So knowing what you're going to tell yourself ahead of time when you get to that point, I think that helps a lot. And then some other like little tricks and things that I tell myself when it gets hard during a race is I just tell myself it's not going to last forever. Like a lot of times the last, 6 miles of the race, I can kind of do the math of like, okay, I'm doing about 6-minute miles. I've got about 6 miles left. That's going to be 36 to 38 minutes roughly of running. And I just kind of start counting down the minutes. I'm like, all right, 35 minutes, 30 minutes, 25 minutes. And just kind of chunking it up instead of like miles, because sometimes the miles at that point feel like forever. And so it's easier to just chunk it up into minutes, because it's like the minutes tick off quicker. So it's like you're getting those wins more frequently, if that kind of makes sense. But I also, at the same time, like to not look at my watch as much as possible. I know it's hard to later in the race, but I try to avoid looking at my watch and really just running based off of feel at that point. I think that helps, because if you're looking at your watch every like 30 seconds, every minute, it's going to make it feel much, much longer and slower than it really is. And again, I kind of just tell myself like, dude, you trained for this, you put in the work, trust the process of everything you've put in up until this point. You knew you were going to get to this point, so just keep pushing forward. You told yourself you're going to do this and you're ready. And one other thing that I actually think about, I really leaned into this during Chicago, was when I got to mile 20, I like assessed how I felt, assessed the pain in my legs. It's like, yeah, it hurts. I'm breathing hard. I'm sweating. My legs hurt. But like, I'm okay. Like, I can still keep going if I have to. Like, I don't need to stop. And then I compare that feeling at mile 20 to how I felt at like mile 5 or mile 10. And usually it's roughly the same. It might be like a notch higher. But I tell myself like, okay, I felt kind of like this at like mile 5 or 10. And that was like 2 hours ago. And so I've been through this uncomfortable feeling for 2 hours, and you're telling me you can't push for another 30 or 40 minutes if you need to. And I think that helps a lot, because it gives you that confidence and like reassurance, like, oh shoot, we went from 5 to 20 and we kind of felt pretty uncomfortable through that. Well, why couldn't we go another 5 or 6 miles? And so it's like kind of tricking your brain and using these like psychological little tools that are obviously going to resonate with you. Everybody's different. So kind of finding what those are and finding that through training and then implementing that during race day. This is, again, a similar question like managing pain, discomfort, negative thoughts. One of my favorite things for negative thoughts and dealing with it is like, it actually came from a podcast I did with Jeff Browning earlier. He's like one of the top ultra runners. I think he's the second winningest ultra runner as far as 100 milers go. And he had this idea of like, your thoughts are these seeds that pop up in our brains. Like, we don't really control what thoughts pop up. It's just like whatever pops up, pops up. Those are our thoughts. But then if you think of those thoughts as seeds, you can water those seeds. And the way you water a seed is by thinking about that thought. So there's a difference between thoughts and thinking. So these thoughts pop up, these little seeds. Your thinking is the water that you pour onto those seeds or onto those thoughts. And the best part about this is you get to choose which seeds you're watering. Are you going to water the positive ones or the negative ones? Are you going to think about those negative thoughts or those positive thoughts? Or are you just going to let the negative ones pass by, run their course through your brain, and then they're off and they're gone forever? So I kind of like to think of that, of like when a negative thought pops up, I just try to not think about it, and I just try to think of something positive. So I like that mindset a lot. And the discomfort thing, like, it's for sure uncomfortable, but that's where training comes in, and just being used to that feeling and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Somebody asked this course versus Boston versus Eugene. So Eugene, if you didn't know, was where I broke the 3-hour mark for the first time. That was May of 2022. So a little bit over a year and a half ago. Eugene is a great course. I love that course. Super flat and fast. I think there's about 400 feet of elevation gain. Chicago's about 230, 240 feet. Boston's about 950 feet of elevation gain. Net downhill, but a very, very hilly course. The weather across all three races, for me at least, were very similar. It rained in Boston, so that was fun. Definitely added an element. But in terms of like temperature across all three, it was almost identical, between like 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which is absolutely perfect for marathon running. Eugene's definitely a smaller race. It's not a world major or anything. It's like 5,000 marathon runners, maybe. It's pretty small, especially compared to Chicago and Boston. Chicago was for sure the easiest course out of all of them. Chicago was such a flat course. There was a couple of inclines here or there. I wouldn't even call them hills. Like, they're really just these little short overpasses, or like these little inclines to like get on top of an overpass or like a bridge, and like the downtown area going over the river. But like by the time you actually started to feel the incline, you were already like at the top, basically. So it was like very minimal. There was one, I would consider it a hill, probably around, I think it was like somewhere between 20 to 22. There's all these people dressed like cows. I just remember that. I was like deep in the pain cave, so I don't remember exactly, but all these people dressed like cows. There's this little hill. There's like, I don't know, maybe like 400 meters long. Not too bad, but that was probably the largest hill. And of course, it's the last like 400 meters of the race. You're coming down Michigan Avenue, and then you take it right onto Roosevelt. Everybody calls it Mount Roosevelt because you're at 26 miles. You got like 0.2 to go, and you got to go up this long, steep little incline to get over this bridge before you get to the finish line. Or it definitely doesn't look like a mountain, but I would say it feels like one when you're 26 miles in, and you're so close. And the whole course has been so flat, and then out of nowhere, there's just this freaking steep incline. So that was challenging, but it's like at that point, you're so close to the finish. You're like, all right, just suffer through it. Just get through it. But I will say logistically, Chicago is such a great course. Eugene was great too, super simple. Boston was more complicated, mostly because it's a point-to-point course. You got to like take the bus out, and you got to leave early, and it's a really late start, and there's all these waves and all this stuff going on. So it's very complex. Chicago is so simple. I mean, you walk in through security, it's laid out very easy. You just find your corral. There's so many corrals that like they're all not super crowded, so it's easy to get in and out, at least where I was. And it's like you could just walk right to it. It's an early morning start at 7:30. You don't have to like wait around for hours and hours like you do at Boston, or from what I hear from New York. So very efficient course, I will say that. They did a really good job. Next question, this marathon versus my first marathon. Oh boy. My first marathon was a shit show, to say the least. It was the BPN marathon that I did here in January of 2022. And I had the wise old decision to try and qualify for Boston and run sub 3 at my very first marathon. I had done 2 sub 130 half marathons, which like on paper should translate to a sub 3. My training was definitely not what it should have been. I think my peak week was like 45 miles. Most weeks were like 35 to 40 miles. Definitely not running enough. Kind of always dealing with like little injuries and stuff. Didn't do any strength training. Didn't know anything about nutrition. Didn't carb load. The night before, I had salmon and asparagus, if that tells you anything. I did take gels. I was doing gels like every like 4 to 5 miles. Actually, I think it was like every 6 miles or something. It was definitely not enough gels. The course was definitely hillier and windier, and it was just a hard course in general. So like I for sure bonked at like mile 20. I remember also at the start, to run sub 3, you got to average like a 650 pace. And I was like, you know what? This is what everybody does when they run their first marathon. You know what? I'm going to be feeling really good early on in this marathon. I should bank some time while I'm feeling good because I know it's going to suck at the end. So genius move that was. I went out and ran like 620 for my first couple miles. Way too fast. It should have been like 650, 655 for the first few. Instead, I just go balls to the wall. So I was on pace for a while, up until about 18 or 20. And then it all just fell apart around mile 20. Bonked pretty hard. I think my like 25th, 26th mile were like 8 minutes a mile. Like my legs were just bricks. Way underfueled, way undertrained. No pacing strategy. I still somehow ran 3 hours and 54 seconds. I still have no clue how I did that, to be honest. Pure grit, I guess, because everything else was incorrect that I did. So, yeah, that was the first marathon experience. Didn't walk, or I walked, but didn't run for like weeks after that. So sore, just laid on the couch. Again, nutrition was like non-existent. Yeah, first marathon was a wreck. My toes were wrecked for sure. I lost several toenails there. And yeah, just a mess. But now this is my 5th marathon in Chicago in the last 2 years, and feet feel fine, no issues, no injuries. Legs felt fully recovered about 2 to 3 days after the race. It's crazy how much you can learn within just a couple of years, or not even a full 2 years. Like, what is that? 20 months basically. That should serve as some confidence for you guys that you can start where I was. Yes, I know 3 hours is fast for a first marathon. I can't ignore that. But like the way I felt, it was just terrible. I felt like 0 out of 10 during and after that first marathon. And then fast forward about 20 months later, and here we are doing much, much better and running a much faster time. So hopefully that serves as some confidence for you guys. Next question. How to run Chicago. Yeah, like how to get into the race, and then any tips for the race. I've kind of gone over some of the tips, but how do you get into Chicago? Similar to all the other major marathons for the most part, is either qualify. I think for me, it was either 3:05 or 3 hours. So I was able to qualify for this, fortunately. If you can't qualify or you're not there yet, you can get in through the lottery, which is obviously one of the harder ways to go about it. Just toss your name in, hope you get picked, and then that's it. And then you can always raise money for charity. And this is what I'm actually doing for the London Marathon for 2024. I've never actually worked with a charity to do a race, which I'm super excited about that. But basically, you partner with a charity. They have to pick you or select you because there's minimum or there's a select few spots available. And then you raise money through your friends, family, connections, whatever, and then whatever funds, if you don't hit the benchmark they set for you, you just got to pay the rest yourself. So that's always an option, but I would highly recommend Chicago. It was an amazing race. Like I said, efficiency wise, like very, very well run race. Super easy to get in and out of. Like the post race party was great. Easy to find family members and stuff. Yeah, I guess tips for Chicago in general. I kind of went over a lot of these, but like show up early. I recommend that for any marathon. Like you can't show up too early. If it's like crazy cold or something, like you don't want to be outside in the cold for too long, but just wear clothes. Get some old hoodies or gloves or beanies and pants and just toss it right before the race starts so you're not standing out in the cold for too long. For Chicago, like try to stay as close to downtown or like to Grant Park as you can, so then you can just kind of walk to everything, like walk to shakeout runs. You probably couldn't walk to the expo. That's kind of a ways away, but you can walk to the start line, to the finish line. They're all kind of in that same Grant Park area. I would also recommend buying like it's like the priority or like VIP kind of pass or something. I didn't get it, but a few of my friends did, and it seemed really nice where their family members could just go and hang out in this like VIP section during the race, and even like you can hang out there before the race too, which is cool. It's like you got your own bathroom, you can sit somewhere warm and heated, you can like get out of all the crowds and all that stuff, and then after the race, or well, I guess during the race, your spouse or family or whatever can hang out in there. They have food and snacks and all this stuff, and then after the race you can go in there, change, hang out there if you want. It's like more private and you have more room and whatnot, so you're not by all the people. I definitely recommend that. I think it's like maybe $150 or something. I don't remember exactly, but that, and then I would also recommend the East Side viewing area. I lucked out and got a ticket for this. I had my videographer there, Chris, who was filming the finish line, but I got an email from the marathon. Like 2 minutes later, I went on and bought the ticket. I went back the next day to try and get it, and it was already sold out. It was like $20, but basically it allows whoever's there spectating you to get to the finish line, so they get videos of you, cheer you on, see you right at the finish line, so that would be helpful too. But yeah, those are kind of broad tips, I guess. If you guys have specific questions about the marathon, just shoot me a DM or email or whatever, and I can try and get back to you. What did I change to PR this marathon? Honestly, from Boston, which I did in April, so about 6 months ago, to now, I didn't change a lot. I would say if I changed anything, it was just more strength training, like more intentional strength training, like specifically like the band work and the single leg stuff. Like I also implemented, I guess, a second leg day. That's probably pretty big. So every week for the Chicago Marathon prep, I did 2 leg days. One, either Tuesday, Wednesday, whichever day my speed work fell on for the week, and then 1 leg day on Saturday after my long run. And I think that helped a lot. Again, like the idea of you go do a really intense workout in the morning, a speed workout or a long run, and then in the afternoon when your legs are already tired and beat down, you hit them again with a leg workout. And everybody thinks it's crazy. It sounds like so challenging, but it's like, it's not. Like the soreness from the workout in the morning doesn't really set in till the next day anyways. So like it's not that hard in my opinion. I think if you just choose the right weights and you take some time to really acclimate your body, it's not that bad. It sounds bad on paper. It sounds intense, but I promise it's not that bad. That was a big game changer. And then band work. I did mini band stuff essentially every day, where I do like kickbacks. I would do the like lateral walks, the like crab, what are they called? The crab things. You know what I'm talking about. And then the like hip thrusters with the mini band, squats with the mini band. It takes like 5 minutes. It's all body weight stuff. You just throw a mini band on around your legs, go through the motions. And I have a video about this somewhere on my Instagram. And you just go through the motions of that every day. I think it does wonders for blood flow, helps loosen everything up, activates those muscles, especially the glutes. Glutes, from what I've learned, are typically the source of most running injuries, weak glutes or just deactivated glutes. And so I think that's what the bands help with a lot. So to summarize that rambling answer, what I changed to PR for this race: more intentional strength training, more band work, and adding in a second leg day for strength training. Recovery post-marathon. Oh, this one kind of sucks for this week, to be honest, because the day I got back from Chicago, the race was Sunday, got back late Monday night. Tuesday morning, I woke up just sick. Not that sick, just like sore throat. My body felt super depleted. I knew I had some kind of bug or something. I had a little bit of cough and like sinus shit. And unfortunately, fortunately, I rarely get sick. It's like 1 to 2 times a year I'll get sick, and it's usually for like 2 to 3 days and then it's gone. But the last time I got sick was the day I got back from the Boston Marathon, and I started looking it up because I'm like, there's no way this is just a coincidence. The only time this year I got sick was right after I did a marathon. And so I looked it up, and apparently it's very, very common with marathon runners or endurance athletes where you do a big hard effort in a race, and then you get back home and you're traveling and all this stuff, and you get back home and then you're sick. And so it makes sense because like we were in Ubers, we were in airports and airplanes, going to the expo, the shakeout run, talking to hundreds of people. At the race itself, you're in the corral with all these people. like I was just around people in stores and shopping and elevators in the hotel and all this stuff, just around people the whole weekend. Plus, you add in a marathon, a very hard, exerting effort on your body. So your body's kind of beat down, your immune system's weakened, and then around all these new germs and people. So it just makes sense. But from my muscular recovery standpoint, my legs felt good probably by like Tuesday or Wednesday. So about 2 to 3 days post marathon, legs felt pretty much back to normal. I really wanted to go run, but I was sick, so I couldn't really. So that kind of sucked. But I guess to answer your question about recovery post marathon, walking is probably the number one thing I would recommend. After the marathon on Sunday, Bree and I walked like 2 or 3 miles to our lunch reservations. We actually had to run a little bit because we were going to be late. So run slash like or light jog slash walk to our lunch reservations for a couple miles, and then went back to the hotel, chilled for a couple hours, and then later that night, I walked another like 2 or 3 miles to go meet up with some people for dinner, walked back. So lots of walking and active recovery, and it's just that blood flow that helps and just that motion. I would say motion is the lotion because it's so true. The blood flow and just that range of motion, getting your knees and your ankles and your hips and everything moving is really what helps speed up recovery, at least for me. So even like the day we got back, from Chicago, like went for a 45-minute walk with the dogs, just getting everything moving. And then also doing some strength training or even just like body weight stuff, just really lightweight body weight stuff. It doesn't need to be anything intense by any means, just going through the motions, doing some squats, doing some lunges, getting that range of motion in and getting the blood flowing. That is what our bodies want, is in a time of recovery, is just blood flow, blood flow, blood flow. And that helps me, and I know that it can help you guys out too. So I encourage you after any race to walk, any big workout, go for a walk. It helps a lot. And then just getting some light strength training too. And then I also obviously try to prioritize like drinking as much water as I can, lots of electrolytes, trying to eat really good, high quality foods. Right after a marathon, you want to eat some carbs. I know you're probably sick of carbs after a marathon, but your glycogen stores are depleted and your muscles need glycogen. They need the carbohydrates to function. And so you want to dump some more carbohydrates back in right after the race. Same thing with protein. The protein helps the recovery process, creatine, all these different things that most people talk about. And for good reason. You want to just try and get as much nutrition and high quality nutrition in as you can in the days after the marathon, even like the whole week post marathon. It'll help a lot. Oh, and one other point I want to add to the recovery side of things is everybody thinks that inflammation is bad when it comes to after a workout or after a race. Like, yes, inflammation is bad on like a daily basis. If you're constantly inflamed, that's not good. You probably need to figure out what that is. But if you feel inflamed after a big workout or after a race, that's good. You want inflammation. So that's why I discourage anybody from hopping in a cold plunge, like right after a big workout or right after a race. And that's within like a 4 to 6 hour window, because your body's natural reaction to stimulus and stress is inflammation. And that's how it promotes blood flow. That's how it recovers. And so blocking that inflammation through like a cold plunge or like an anti-inflammatory pill, like ibuprofen or Tylenol or something, that's just going to stop that natural process from occurring. So I'm not a doctor by any means, so this is not medical advice, but in my own experience, within like the first 6 hours of a big race or a workout, do not take, I'll say this, I do not take any kind of inflammation blocker, anti-inflammatory, or any kind of thing that's going to do that, because it blocks the good inflammation. But I will say after the race, after that like 6 hour period, like the next morning, Bree and I went to this bathhouse. It was called like RA Bathhouse or Air Bathhouse, AIRE. And basically it was this giant underground building with all these different big baths and pools and steam rooms and cold plunges. And for like 90 minutes, we just cycled in and out. We'd sit in the steam room for like 15 minutes. Then we'd hop in the cold plunge. Then we'd go sit in this like hot salt bath, and we'd like float. And then we would go back in the cold plunge, and then we'd go into this like jet pool where there's all these jets blowing on you, and then go back into the cold plunge and just cycling in and out. And that contrast therapy, I think that made a big difference for recovery too. Obviously, it didn't help with the cold at all, but I think from a muscular standpoint, it definitely helped a lot. So if you're going to use a cold plunge, if you're going to use any kind of like anti-inflammatory thing, just make sure you wait at least 6 hours after your race or after your workout. Okay, got a few questions left. How to go from a 4-hour marathon to sub 3. This is like the $1 million question, right? The average marathon time, from what I know, is around 4 hours, and everybody wants to get that like coveted sub 3. There's a lot of things I could tell you, and you could probably gather a lot of that from what I've already told you in this podcast. But I would say there's two main things that's going to take you from sub 4 or from a 4-hour marathon to sub 3, and that is consistency and patience. If you can be consistent for, I know some people it might take 6 months, some people it might take 6 years. If you can be consistent for that amount of time, show up, strength train, run consistently, take care of recovery, sleep well, good nutrition, good hydration, and you can be consistent, and most importantly, being patient and trusting the process of everything and just showing up day in, day out, being able to put in the work without seeing direct results and just show up and do the work and be patient for however long it takes. That's what's going to get you to sub 3. You could be a 6-hour marathoner and get to sub 3. It doesn't matter where you're starting at. Everybody, in my opinion, can truly run a sub 3 marathon. It just takes some people longer than others, but as long as you want it bad enough, I know how cliche and cheesy that sounds like. If it's something that you want bad enough and you're willing to show up and put in the time and the work and the effort that it requires, you can for sure do it. So all these like little details, they're great. They can make, the 1-2% difference here or there, but as a whole, from like a macro point of view, be consistent and just be patient. And I promise if you do those two things, you can get wherever you want to go. You can go run a 2:44 marathon if you're consistent and you're patient and you just trust the process of everything. So it's unfortunately the answer that I know nobody wants to hear. Everybody just wants the like quick fix of, oh, if you just run this pace for this many miles a week, you can run sub 3. But instead, it's like it's all these little things in addition to the big ideas of consistency and patience. So that's my answer to that. All right, 2 questions left. Balancing training with life. I had a lot of people ask this, and it's tough for sure. And I actually put out a post about this the other day of like, what's the hardest part about a marathon? Is it mile 20? Is it the cramps? Is it the nutrition? I said for me, it's not any of those things. It's like the sacrifices you have to make to even get to that point, like waking up early every morning, going for a run, missing out on like Saturday morning family time or Friday night out with friends because you got a long run that day. Like everybody makes, if you're training the right way, you have to make sacrifices in some regard, whether it's for sleep or family or friends or your social life, your kids, whatever it is. Marathons are hard. Marathons are taxing. They require so much time and energy, and they're really basically like I don't know if it's a full-time job. I'd say a part-time job between, 10 hours of running a week plus another 5 to 10 hours of strength training and recovery and, spending time on nutrition and all this stuff. It becomes a part-time job essentially. And so you're going to have to sacrifice something. And I would say if you had to prioritize what to sacrifice, time you spend on your phone or time that you spend out with friends drinking or, doing things that aren't really going to benefit you, and just prioritize your life for 4 months and make some sacrifices to like how much, what are the things that are going to help you succeed and become a better person? Is it spending 3 hours a day watching Netflix, or is it going for a run for an hour and then spending 30 minutes in the gym, and then spending an hour watching TV? It's like, you can still do those things. It's just, how are you prioritizing? How are you managing your time? And obviously everybody's situation is different. Like I'm fortunate enough, I guess, to not have kids, depending on how you look at it. So I don't have that, but we have 2 dogs, 2 golden retrievers who are basically children. I've got a fiance who we spend time together on a daily basis. We go out on the weekends. We go do family things. I have friends I want to hang out with. I have like businesses to run and build, and I'm coaching clients. Like there's a lot that I do, and everybody's busy. Everybody has their own things. Everybody has kids or a job or whatever it is. And so it's just prioritizing what's important to you And hopefully those are things that are going to make you better and contribute to your success and your health, your fitness, your family, and your work. I think those are pillars of life. And so making your decisions around those, I think that's how you balance marathon training with life. Last question, winter training, how to train through the winter slash off season. I'll start with like the off season stuff. So for me, I try to do like, at least lately, last couple of years, I try to do 2 big marathon efforts per year and try and space them out about every 6 months. I don't know if this is true, but I think that's why all the major marathons are spaced out the way they are. Tokyo, London, and Boston are all in the spring in like March or April. And then Chicago, Berlin, and New York are all in the fall in October and November. And I think it's because like for elite runners and everybody else, like it's best to go for a PR about every 6 months or like a big effort every 6 months. Like you don't want to be doing it more than twice a year, in my opinion. And so I like to do this cycle where I do about a 3 to 4 month block of training, run the marathon, let's just say here in October. Then I'll take like November, December to just kind of chill, figure out what else I want to do, maybe do some like base building, like just some really long, easy runs, not do a lot of speed work, or kind of shifting gears and like reducing running volume, but doing like more intense speed work where like you do some 100-meter sprints, 200-meter sprints, just some like really short, intense stuff to like work on that top end speed. And then after that, like 2 month block, November, December, then like January, I'll pick it up again and I'll start training again for my marathon in London in April. And then following London, I'll kind of repeat that same thing. Like April, May, June, I'll kind of chill out a little bit. And I will maybe chill out in terms of like intensity of the training. I'll still probably keep maybe around the same time spent training, roughly. We'll see. This year might be different because I'm running a 100-miler in June. During the summers, I definitely like to incorporate more trail running, more like base building, longer, easier miles, a lot of hiking whenever possible. So that's just how I like to do it. Say like July, August comes around, then it's back into marathon training for like that fall marathon. So again, everybody's different. That's what I prefer to do. That's kind of like the off-season stuff that I like to do. I also like to work on strength a lot in the off-season. So like November, December now for me is going to be like really focused on like deadlifting heavy, squatting heavy, bench press heavy. Like I might put on like, another 5 pounds of muscle if I can, eating a lot more, running less, and lifting more for the next couple months. And then it's kind of the same thing with winter training. As it's basically the same thing is I will eat more. I'll increase my calories a little bit. I'll run less. I'll probably put on a little bit of weight so that I can gain some muscle. I'll lift heavier and just really spend more time lifting, honestly, probably like at least an hour to an hour and a half a day for like 5 to 6 days a week. I'll still probably run 4 to 6 days a week. My longest run on the weekends, on average, it'll probably be about 10 miles up to like maybe 13, 14 miles. So nothing too crazy long. An average day of running will probably just be like 3 to 5 miles easy. And then probably like either a fartlek session in the middle of the week, or like I said, some like shorter interval stuff, like 100, 200, 400 meter sprints on the track, just to work on that top end speed. I will say I would love to at some point do a 500-pound deadlift and a sub 5 mile. That's definitely on my bucket list. I don't know when that'll happen, or if I will ever do it, or if I'll actually spend the time to work towards it, because it would basically be a whole training block in itself. But I definitely would love to do that at some point. And then I would also love to eventually do an Ironman. I've done one sprint triathlon, and I would really love to do an Ironman at some point. And then High Rocks. High Rocks seems very interesting to me. I know a few people that do it, and it seems like a lot of fun. It feels like something I would be decent at because it's definitely more cardio based, but it also requires a little bit of strength. And it just seems like a fun race, like a whole new community to be a part of. And I don't know, just something new to train for, a different style of training. So I guess in the immediate future, London Marathon in April, I may do the Austin Marathon in February. And then I have the Bighorn 100-miler in June, which is in the mountains in Wyoming. And then I will be doing the New York Marathon in November of next year. So that's kind of like the next 12 months roughly. I may mix in like a High Rocks or something like that. I want to for sure do the 6 major marathons, get the 6 stars. I'll have that done hopefully by the end of 2025, and then probably shift gears into maybe like an Ironman. I definitely have a lot of like 100-mile races on my bucket list I would love to do. So who knows? I want to just keep staying healthy, keep doing cool things, traveling, seeing the world, seeing you guys, building a community, being a part of the running community, which I think is the best community in the whole entire world. So welcoming and encouraging and just like so supportive of anybody and everybody. And I love it so much. But that is the podcast for today. I really appreciate you guys listening. I feel like this was just an absolute ramble fest from me, but hopefully you guys got something out of it. Hopefully I provided some value. I hope that you can learn from all my mistakes and some of the few successes that I've had, and use them to implement them into your training so that you can get a PR, you can hit the goal you want, whether it's qualify for Boston, finish a marathon, run an ultra, whatever the heck it is. I hope you guys can use this information to go out and do those things. So again, thank you guys for listening. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.